So this is the time of the week where I start to get my sleep schedule back on track. After waking up super early at 8 a.m. to continue making videos on the trades and the draft picks and the signings, it has been an eventful week whose momentum will hopefully carry us on into the rest of the offseason. But because we are in the offseason, now it is time to start out novelty content. We're not talking about stuff that happened today. This is not a news update. No. This is a series of videos that we had popularized back in the... oh boy, when did we start doing these 1 year laters? Like 2019-ish? 2020? Something like that? Today, what I wanted to do was take a retrospective look at the biggest Montreal Canadiens shock of the 2023 season. Not 23-24, I'm talking about 22-23. Because at the end of that campaign, the Montreal Canadiens finished pretty poorly in the NHL standings. They had themselves the 5th overall draft pick, and they used it to select a guy that many fans were kind of upset about at the time. Let's talk today about the Montreal Canadiens 2023 first-rounder, David Reinbacher, and where things have gone since his erroneous draft selection 1 year ago. Now, the reason I say erroneous is not because the selection of David Reinbacher was erroneous. He's a fine prospect, but I literally say that the pick was erroneous because if you remember, the big moment that happened when Reinbacher was drafted was that Carey Price was the guy who said it. And unfortunately, Carey Price forgot David Reinbacher's name upon the selection of the pick, and he kind of stood there in awkwardness. He said the Canadiens are proud to select David, and then he paused. And it was a really embarrassing moment. David Reinbacher didn't technically hear his name called up on the NHL draft stage for the first 10 seconds or so. But of course, all actual draft selection talk aside, David Reinbacher was a huge name in the 2023 Canadiens history books because of the simple fact that he was not Matvei Michkov. He wasn't the top-tier, talented, point-producing, goal-scoring, Connor Bedard offensive ceiling rivaling player like Michkov was. Instead, he was a big, right-handed defenseman who had had a really strong season in Europe, not gonna lie. David Reinbacher, in his draft-eligible year, had 22 points in 46 games played with EHC Cloton. He was a mobile, shutdown defenseman, and there was a rock-solid quality to his ability to play the position. This was a much different pick than Michkov, and I know this is a 1 year later Reinbacher video. Lego, why don't you shut up about Michkov? Hey, we can't ignore that was a super big part of the deal back then. It was made even worse when Kent Hughes the very next day said that if David Reinbacher was not a right-handed defenseman, they would not have prioritized him as much as they did. Essentially, a lot of the comments made by Kent Hughes indicated that the Montreal Canadiens last year drafted for need. And that was a big red flag in the eyes of some Canadiens fans. I guess now you can say that it kind of makes sense when you consider what they did in 2024, but we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. So with Matvei Michkov off the board at 7, you had David Reinbacher making himself one of the biggest targets for Montreal Canadiens fan criticism every time he would go out there and have a pointless game, or he wouldn't look all too great, or whenever Michkov would score a point or a goal or a hat trick or whatever in the KHL, Habs fans would always be like, okay, there's that Michkov guy. Meanwhile, what's Reinbacher doing? Okay, look, he's not doing anything. And the unfortunate part about Reinbacher's season 1 year after the draft was that he only had 11 points in 35 games played. The production went down in the Swiss League. But the reason for that is because, plain and simple, EHC Cloton was terrible in 2023-2024. They were second last in the entire Swiss League, 52 games played, they only had 12 wins. Really, really terrible record for this team. They had a minus 69 goal differential. They had 52 points on the year, and David Reinbacher was unfortunately a part of that. Now, the team wasn't bad because Reinbacher was bad. Reinbacher just had a really difficult time because his teammates were kinda trash. And as a result, it was really difficult to get a gauge as to where Reinbacher's development actually went. Was he really improving? Was his performance superior than that of when he was only 17, 18 years old? Or is he more or less the same? Has he gotten worse even? And it's difficult to do analyses on these kinds of seasons in Europe, especially with the differences of the game and how badly some of these team performances are on the ice with Reinbacher. So it wasn't really until the end of the EHC Kloten season where Canadiens fans started to actually understand what Reinbacher is about. Because after his Swiss season concluded, David Reinbacher headed over to the Laval Rocket, where he suited up in 11 games, had 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 total points. The point production, obviously, much better than what he had in Switzerland, but also, interesting to note, this was a guy who, on North American ice in the AHL, was looking very solid. He had scored some big goals, he was making some big plays, and he showed a level of competency, debuting in the American Hockey League, that you rarely see out of 19-year-old guys. Especially as a mobile, defensively sound, right-handed defenseman, David Reinbacher showed to a lot of Canadiens fans that, hey, this guy could potentially be a top 2, minutes-eating, all situations, right-handed shutdown guy. Or, if you wanted to play him on the second pairing, he could develop into one of the best second pairing defensemen in the entire league. He might even start producing a few points here and there, who really knows? He's got the breakout passing ability and he's got the IQ to be able to get points. If David Reinbacher maxes out as a 30, 40-point defenseman who plays just a ton of minutes and is super reliable in his own zone as a big, solid defender, then I think Montreal Canadiens fans are pretty happy with that. I mean, sure, it's not the 100-point potential like Matvei Michkov has, but 25-plus minute defensemen are also valuable in their own right. You can't just grab those players out of nowhere. So for David Reinbacher, for him to showcase in the AHL, the very small sample at the end of the season, that he is still worth thinking about, and he is pretty much the best right-handed defenseman prospect the team has, this was a fairly significant pickup for the team at 5th overall 1 year ago. And the funny part is, you can say that the Matvei Michkov passing on in 2023 was vindicated by the Ivan Demidov pick here in 2024. Now, I know the argument exists that in an ideal world, you'd have Michkov and Demidov together. Screw Caulfield and Slafkovsky. Michkov and Demidov will be the 1-2 punch on forwards, and you would have so many extra options to go with that heading into the next few years. But if you think about it like, hey, the Canadiens have their 3 guys set in place. They have Caulfield, they have Suzuki, they have Slafkovsky, they now have Demidov. If you have this roster on paper, what do you think is more valuable to add on? A David Reinbacher or a Matvei Michkov? Another super highly talented offensive contributor who might even step on the toes of all of the extra forwards that have those capabilities as well, or somebody to really stabilize the back end. You could debate that the diversity in position makes Reinbacher a more understandable pick today than when it was initially announced that he was the guy by Montreal in 2023. Of course, that is with hindsight included. Oh, Demidov was the Canadiens' pick next year, which makes it okay for them to skip out on him in this year. Like, of course, that's not how it works, but it is one way of viewing the domino effect as to how the Montreal Canadiens ended up making their draft selections. So, for now, 1 year later, David Reinbacher is still looking like a pretty solidified top 3, top 2 caliber defenseman prospect for the Montreal Canadiens. He's looking to potentially be the number 1 guy alongside of maybe Elaine Hudson long term. If you wanted to stack up Reinbacher-Guhle together, then nobody is going to go out there and best out that pairing and score anything while those guys are on the ice. And ultimately, with Reinbacher and his offensive potential as well, growing slowly as he gets older and advances to higher levels of play, there is a lot to look forward to out of the Montreal Canadiens' Austrian right-handed defenseman prospect. So, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about David Reinbacher and his entire profile 1 year after the draft. How do you think he's going to perform? What are your opinions as to how he's progressed since then? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.